And this is the system that Alina's been talking about and you've been reading about in the e-news. It may seem a little cumbersome to get going with here. And this is where you saw some instructions in this last e-news about how to get going with the give pull system. There's a couple of I did a short video, by the way. You can see that it's on the URL here, tiny URL give pulse intro. That's a quick 6-minute intro in terms of getting started with give pulse. There's a much more elaborate video that is that the Clark County Master Gardeners put forward, and you saw that URL in the e-news. John posted that in the e-news, and here's a real shortcut, by the way, to get to our site, tinyurl.com PNWMG Pulse. So that URL there, tinyurl.com / PNWMG Pulse. That URL right there, right, is will give you, will get you right to our site here. Okay. Reminder to, okay, very good. Reminder to everyone, by the way, that we're getting some feedback on the line here. So everyone needs to be muted if you would. And I think and so I'm getting some background noise. And so just you get some background noise on the when there's feedback. So it's helpful if everyone's muted. Okay, May to-dos. This is from the Oregon State gardening calendar, the May to-dos. This is interesting. So Oregon is all excited about planting, right? When the soil is consistently above 70 degrees, to get your soil in. And so it's going to be a while, right, before we get to 70 degrees. I think as I've indicated, hopefully you all have your own soil thermometers so that you can measure your own soil temperatures. But WSU at their weather.wsu.edu, they have their own site that has different soil temperature sites at the WSU extension locations. This is this is a few days old here from when I last went to it. But soil temperatures are certainly nowhere near 70 degrees at any of our locations here. Although this week, I believe they're going to be shooting up quite significantly. But just a heads up that you always can check Ag WeatherNet, the Ag WeatherNet at WSU for these locations across the state. And if you don't have your own soil temperatures, your soil thermometers. Okay, cleanup, obviously time to fertilize rhododendrons and azaleas. It's interesting that established rhodies and azaleas, of course, need very little, in the way of new nutrients. Remove spent blossoms. This is actually one of the most taxing times of year, isn't it, right? To keep track of taking off old blossoms. I was just remarking this morning, I've got a camellia tree that needs to be addressed. I've got half my rhododendrons need attention. So it's a great day to get out, and a great day to get out and clearing out those blossoms. Comment about disease-resistant roses here, and and being thoughtful about black fungus, because we still have a lot of very wet time to come, and so fungus and other bacteria are going to be pretty nasty here. It's interesting, by the way, that we actually had some California lilacs that that really got into trouble here with some quick fungus just very recently here. So it was very unfortunate that the very resistant California lilac, but unfortunately just it's the sogginess of the ground and how I was treating it killed it off pretty quickly. Planting. Obviously a lot of things to do here. We're putting a lot of starts in already, in our covered gardens. And I would encourage, it obviously depends upon your soil temperatures and whether you can control moisture and rain and so forth. But we certainly seem to be off to a drier start to the year, and if not necessarily a warmer start. So and I really do hope, by the way, just given that everyone is already eagerly procuring your seed stock and your starts, because like last year, the nurseries here are having a difficult time finding wholesale stock. So we're anticipating another big year for home gardening. And so get your orders in if, for your seeds and your stock. Do not delay, because it sounds like it's going to be hard pressed to fill demand. Pest monitoring, right? It's time. We just noted this morning that a slug had already it was happily munching into our new lettuce starts. And I'm seeing spittle bugs. I'm seeing a lot of aphids, by the way, and a lot of aphid damage already. So it is interesting. For me, it seems earlier than normal to see problems. But I'm definitely and so it's an alert saying it's time to start monitoring for pest. It seems odd, however, that we're monitoring for pest at the same time we're still not necessarily out of the frost risk. Again, WSU, the plantmaps, right, .com, plantmaps.com talks about the last frost date historically. And we've still got a ways to go. Here at the coast, we're just out of that last, we've just passed May 10th. So we're just out of a frost risk here. But the interior, you all in the interior, still have significant risk of frost that could happen. The other point I wanted to bring up, this isn't something new I learned this year, is this started in England, but it's been picked up big time here, and the Xerxes Society is doing a big promotion of Nomo May. And the advice here is just, hey, leave your lawn untended for this month in order to encourage pollinators. And I don't know, I tried some of this last year in terms of just letting my lawn go longer before cutting. And I really found it's amazing how alive the lawn becomes with tiny little pollinators. Tiny little insects that are all out there. If even your grasses have a chance to show some inflorescence and to attract some pollinators. So again, this is actually a movement here of Nomo May is to in fact, Xerxes actually has on their website, you can print out this poster to put a sign on your yard. So you're telling your neighbors that you're not being, you're not abandoning care for your lawn, but you're giving Nomo May a chance. So it's a fun and an important movement here. Okay, looking ahead to the calendar this year, calendar dates. Obviously, as you know from working in our demo gardens and the beds, lots of opportunity all year long to get your volunteer hours in at the demo beds and gardens. So reach out to the owners, right, the managers of each of those beds to ensure that you're collaborating with them and giving them the resources that the beds need. We're obviously not going to have a home and garden show. That would be happening this weekend, by the way. This weekend would be the normally scheduled weekend after Mother's Day, which we would normally be having the home and garden show. Instead, of course, we had our Mother's Day plant sale, May 1st and May 8th. As I noted at the very beginning, my very beginning of the slide, right, we were so successful on that first Saturday, May 1st, that Terry was able to cancel day 2. And Terry, I see that you're on now. So any comments? And I gave the thank you slide early on, but some comments you'd like to share? And again, congratulations to you and the entire team, Terry.
Well, I just can't thank our volunteers enough for being there to at all the various stages of putting the planter sale together. The actual planters, the unplanted planters, were just incredibly commented on and well received. And we had such a nice group of volunteers who helped with the actual sale days. So it was fantastic. And Shushila did a great job. Shushila and Bridget did a great job organizing the sale in in Ocean Shores as well. So it was our best May planter sale ever, and I hope we can repeat it.
Congratulations again, and again, a huge thank you to all the volunteers, right? Because this is it takes a lot of time to pull all this together, as Terry well knows, and the execution, of course, was just flawless. And again, think about the joy we bring to everybody that bought, so it's just very cool. Okay, so we have the plant sales there. The garden tour is on the 24th, and Terry, I'm here to tell you that Robin is also on the call with us this morning and says, return her call. Show some love to Robin.
Yeah, I'm finally coming up for air.
I know you've been super busy. I'm just getting a little stressed all of a sudden because it's becoming a reality. It's really going to happen, and so we need to talk.
I will definitely call you after this meeting.
Okay, great.
So July 24th. Now, note to everyone here on the call, here's an opportunity again for volunteer hours as docents across the gardens that will be on the tour, as well as the sale that will be happening that day. So July 24th, please put that date down in your calendar. And also, in preparation for July 24th, think about dividing your plants. And this is a great time to hit up all of your neighbors, by the way, that maybe have plants to donate. We actually have a friend here who cultivates native irises, Pacific native irises, and so I've already got 150 gallons of native irises ready to contribute here for July 24th. So, putting the challenge out there, guys, to get those plants together.
Also, I have hundreds of black nursery pots. If anyone needs pots for potting up things,
I do too.
Okay, so if you let me know, I will figure out how to get them to you. And my stand is falling apart. my computer stand.
So again, so everyone, and it's one of those things is that is we should look upon this as an opportunity to get rid of our gallon pots, right? Because I'm sure there's no question that even with 150 potted up, there's probably another 150 pots I still have to work with here. Okay, so July 24th, right? Make sure your plants are ready for July 24th. The appeal of that July 24th then is think about all the summer flowering plants that could be in great bloom by late July. So this is a great opportunity, because this sale is going to be held in late July, to think about summer blooming plants and having those ready for resale. Okay, a quick shout out also to Trish Bradbury and the team. We had 7 applications. 7 applications are under review for the scholarship this year. Okay. And so Trish reports that they've not made a selection yet. We'll have that selection known next month. But we had 7 applications from across the 2-county area. And again, a shout out to Trish and team for the program, because just by having the program, right, we encourage visibility to the Master Gardener program. We encourage visibility to WSU Extension. And so we get the word out to a whole new community of youth about who we are. With that, can I open it up to folks here for announcements, other announcements that people want to have? And again, just you can temporarily unmute yourself by holding down your space bar on your computer.
Kelly, I'd like to make an announcement.
Please, Elizabeth.
Okay, this Elena, who's not able to be here today, asked me to let people know. Some of you may have heard that Betsy Seidel, who is a volunteer coordinator throughout the county, asked for nominations for people who have contributed a lot with volunteer work. And one of the people that Elena nominated was Aaron Landon. no, it wasn't Erin Landon, it was Katie Lutz. Sorry, Erin, probably you're next year. But Katie Lutz was nominated for the hours that she has volunteered, for managing the education classes, for being that librarian in the know who has shared so much information with all of us around what's at the library and how the library can help support master gardeners as they maybe have computer issues, etc. But Elena recognized her and she was mentioned on the radio. So
Hey,
kind of cool.
congratulations to Katie.
Congratulations to Katie.
Katie has a day
Really?
job, so that's why she can't join us here. Other announcements.
And I'd like to, one more from me, actually two, of course, regarding the library in Montesano, but of course you can do it by Zoom. We're going to have a talk by our city forester, Lauren Heiner, about all the trails around and the, some information on those, what to do if you get lost and how not to get lost. And that will be Tuesday, the 25th at noon. And then if that really gets you going, on Saturday, the 6th of June, the first Saturday in June, is Trails Day. We meet up about 9 o'clock over by the beach at Lake Sylvia, and people go off in the woods and work on the trails. So both of those are coming up.
Thank you, Helen. Lots of things. So reach out to Helen for some of those dates and those activities. Other
Thank you.
announcements.
Okay, so I'm going to jump in again, Kelly. This is Elizabeth. And one of the things that I was thinking, and I keep thinking about this, John, every single month I think about letting you know what's happening with youth activities. But someone mentioned to me, I think it was, maybe it was Elena from Tony, that she would like to see more in our e-news about what's going on in different parts of the counties. And so I just want to announce that I've been working with many of our interns, seeing if we can get their outreach hours in, working with kids. So we've been providing some outreach to Acosta Elementary. We are not going out there. They don't want strangers on campus, but they, their campus isn't open yet. So it's been through Zoom and through providing, I would have to call it technical support to some of the things that they're doing with youth at Acosta. And we have been having some videos that are being posted to our YouTube channel. And so you can go in and see Kathy Sandifer, for instance, presenting something on upcycling containers. So they're just fun things that folks are doing to get Master Gardener name out there, but also to provide some education in the community. And it's been a definite learning experience for everyone as they're learning to Zoom, as they're learning to videotape, and we've had some really great people helping us edit those videos. So
Most excellent. Thanks for sharing.
So Kelly, this is Cindy. I have a couple of things to share. First, I wanted to let folks know that right now, camas is blooming. And so if you're in the east side of Grays Harbor County, you might see camas. It's a pretty little wildflower that blooms in mass in, technically they're prairie areas, they're remnant prairies in the east side of Grays Harbor County, but where you can see them best are places like along the Monte Brady or Monte Elma Road that goes, it's kind of the back road that goes between Montesano and Elma. So at the golf course is a great place to see a lot of camas in bloom. Certainly at the fairgrounds, there's some camas in the fields around the fairgrounds and also across the street from the fairgrounds. And at Brady itself also is a lovely little spot of camas. Now we don't always pay attention to it, but it's a nice way to see a little bit of wildflowers, and they're just starting to bloom right now. So that's one thing I wanted to let you know, kind of a fun little thing. The other thing is that we are getting ready to kick off the executive committee for planning the 2022 training. And we have our executive committee selected and we're ready to go, but we will be needing people to help us in our subcommittees. So that's something to be aware of, that if you want to help with planning of training or even participation in putting on training, that's something to look for. I will certainly be sending out information, and there'll be more information in the e-news on that also. So those two are all I had to offer. So we'll talk to you later.
Well, I've got you there as it, Cindy, and I know Mike Carvey is in the line here too. I wanted to repeat the announcement I made early on, is that the fairs are going to be held this summer. So put on your calendar, right, to think about reaching out to Cindy, who'll be coordinating the Grays Harbor Fair participation, as well as to Mike, who'll be coordinating the Pacific County Fair near the end of the month. So again, to all the interns out there, this is a great opportunity for plant clinic hours, because a big part of what we do at both fairs is host clinics for people. So be thinking about how you can contribute and your time, and be thinking about those dates there.
Yeah. So and just a little punctuation to that is the difference between the two county fairs is that we actually have a demonstration garden at the county fair in Grays Harbor County. So that's where the master gardeners will be present, and they talk to people within the garden. And so they talk about what's in the garden, and they also answer gardening questions there as well. So it's a little bit more hands-on. So
Wants to see your back.
Mike, anything to share regarding Pacific County Fair?
Well, I've made contact with Tony Gwynn for a tour of the facility, since it looks like we're going to be relocated. And so Tony is clearing her schedule, coordinate together. We'll go out there for a site visit and come up with a nice plan for where we're going to be able to place all of our demonstration stuff that we've got and what we have available to us.
Looking forward to August. Also looking forward to is September, because the state education conference will be held. It's all going to be virtual, and it's going to be held virtually at the end of September. Erin, do you want to share more?
Sure. The going virtual has actually opened up a lot of opportunities that we wouldn't necessarily have with an in-person conference. Like we are going to have over 30 learning opportunities with eligibility of over 36 hours of continuing education. And how that works is not all of it, the majority of the classes are going to be recorded, and those recordings will be available for up to 30 days after the conference at no additional charge. It's included in your registration. Over 35% of the instructors are university-based individuals. So they're really focusing on leveling up the level of the education and definitely advanced education. But at the same time, we're really trying to keep a lot of the social aspects that a lot of people really, or a lot of the people, that's why they went to the conference, was the social aspects and being able to meet master gardeners from other counties and things. And so they're going to do a number of themed chat parties, like about plant clinics or diversity and inclusion. And these will be moderated kind of open talks in the afternoons after classes, just to kind of be able to kind of socialize and brainstorm on, what's working well for some counties in certain areas. For our keynote speaker, we're going to have a virtual cocktail hour where we can have some open conversation. The keynote speaker is this very inspiring photographer. His work is just amazing. And he focuses on gardens primarily. They're also going to do virtual tours. So since we can't do in-person tours, they're going to try to get tours from various gardens around the state and video them. And so you can watch them in between classes and on breaks. And those will probably be available after the conference as well. We are going to have a marketplace and we're looking for vendors for the marketplace. They can offer coupons or, you know, special deals on gardening related items, and it'll be kind of a virtual place where you can go to a page within the website and see, you know, what their offers are. And we aren't not doing a raffle because it's all virtual. The state of Washington does not allow online raffles. It's a violation of gambling laws. So, but we are doing the silent auction. And so one of the big things we're looking for is contributions to the silent auction. It's a fundraising opportunity for us as a county foundation because we get 50% of the proceeds from anything that is sold at the silent auction that we donate. And but they also want it to be mailable. So gift certificates or things like that are ideal because they're easy to mail, and the cost of shipping or mailing comes out of our proceeds. So if anyone has any ideas for things that can be donated, like a, you know, bed and breakfast or, you know, something along those lines, you can get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with the person who's coordinating the silent auction. And I guess that brings you to the final bit is early bird registration opens June 1st. And registration fee for early bird is $95. And all the information is available on the website, all the classes, the information about the keynote speaker and a full schedule is on mglearns.org.
There you go. So again, September 30th through October 2nd, a great opportunity for continuing education. The fact that it's going to be virtual, right, you know, means no excuse for not participating. And the website is up there now, right, Erin? mglearns.org.
Yes.
The other conference I want to give a heads up to is the International Master Gardener Conference. This is held biannually, every other year. There's an International Master Gardener Conference. This year, it's also going to be virtual. And it's going to be September, just had it, the 17th or so, September 7th. It's actually 6 days. And it, and again, so it, but just to do it's being held in Newport News. The Virginia State Master Gardener Foundation is hosting it this year. So again, it heads up, and I'll share more about that as we get into it. So no excuse for not getting your continuing education hours in this year, folks. No excuse. Hey, a quick note about phishing attacks. All of this ransomware stuff we keep hearing about, you know, this is real. These are real concerns. It's, you are not, just because you're not a major pipeline or a government agency or a huge business, you're not excused from being victimized, right, by these attacks. So pay attention to these things. There are all kinds of guides online about how to avoid phishing schemes. Bottom line, don't click on anything that you don't know is from a trusted source. Similarly, by the way, there's a bunch of gift card scams going on right now, and we talked about this last month. And again, you can see here on the FTC, Federal Trade Commission is really pushing out some public and news alerts here to make sure make darn sure, right? That I mean, no one's going to be asking you to pay by gift card, right? That's a sure sign of a scam, as the note is there saying. The other note I want to make here is that remember how to whitelist, email addresses that you want to receive. One of the big things that John and I deal with all the time is folks that say, I'm not getting the e-news, or I'm not getting a communication from John or from Katie. And that's a sure sign that somehow a spam filter on your email is taking emails and pushing them into spam. So be sure to take emails that you want to receive, and make sure that and whatever your email application is, be it Yahoo, be it AOL, be it Outlook, be it Gmail, be it Apple, that you're using whatever the whitelist function is to ensure that you're allowing those emails to come through. Consequently, you can also block senders, right? It's easy enough to block. And the final note I want to give some heads up, right, is the programs we're going to be talking about coming in the future. Next month, we will be fated by joining Dr. Sally Brown. Dr. Brown is at UW, and she is all about water quality. And so on June 8th, she'll be with us here to talk about a very interesting research project that's underway in terms of composting and how compost can be used as a carbon sink. And the URL that you see on the screen here below you leads you to a series of articles that Sally has written in the Biocycle publication, talking about compost and its relation to CO2 levels in the atmosphere. There's some phenomenal new research that she wants to share on this. And she's very thrilled, by the way, to be able to come to us and engage with us. So that's June 8th. That's the second Tuesday of June, at this same time at 10 o'clock, on June 8th. Sally Brown will be with us. And I encourage you to go ahead and read up on her research. And it's a phenomenal introduction, by the way, in terms of how important composting can be relative to saving the planet. With that, however, I want to, welcome Doug Collins, who's joining us here today. And again, as I indicated earlier, is that one of the great things about Zoom is that we are able to get access to folks from across the UW and the WSU schools here to share with us various aspects of research and various thoughts. One of the questions that came up during last month's meeting was about organic material and the richness of soil, and can soil be too rich? Can it be too organic? You recall James Cassidy, who's the soils science lecturer at Oregon State University, and James Cassidy has that. Remember his freshman class on soil science has a quick quip. Is that he asked, "What's the answer to any question I'm going to ask this term?" And the answer is add organic matter. So in James Cassidy's view, right, at OSU, there could be you can't have enough of a good thing. You can't have enough of organic matter. However, it is quite interesting in some of the publications that I've shared and we'll talk about here now. Maybe you can have a little too much. With that, though, let me introduce Doug. Take it over, Doug, and please share. Let's talk.
Okay. Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I guess I'm not sure, maybe jump right into that question. I guess I would maybe throw it back at people like, what do people think are the risks of maybe adding too much organic matter? I'd be curious to hear sort of where you are on that question.
And so
think
obviously,
too much sorry, Kelly.
Go ahead. I was just going
to think that too much would throw the pH out of balance.
And that's exactly what I was going to add. Yeah.
By making it too acidic?
Or one way or the other, I would think, right?
Yeah, one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Any other risks that people can think of for too much?
I would think it would also increase opportunities for fungus or bacterial activity.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good one. The pH of most compost is going to be fairly neutral, but what happens when we have basically one of the ways we form acidity is from the decomposition of organic material. So as organic materials decompose,
that's why you have nitrogen.
They produce hydrogen ions, and that reduces pH. So over time, very high organic soils or materials, you could see them decreasing in pH. One of the things that really strikes me is about the water dynamics. So organic matter has a lot of surface area, and water is going to be attracted to that surface area, and then it's also going to affect the pore distribution, and so maybe you get a lot more micropores. In any case, you can understand, like if you see sort of wet compost or something, there's a lot of water, it's heavy. And so compost and organic materials will just absorb water like a sponge. And that can basically, you're filling, if you had a soil or a potting media that was, you know, 100% organic matter, you have the potential to really fill all of those pore spaces with water, and then there's not any pore space for oxygen. So I would see that the risk, one of the risks would be not enough air exchange when you have too much organic matter. But it's certainly not it's not a question, or there's no answer that I think is very definitive, because every soil type is going to be different. You know, when you look at, obviously there's a big industry for selling garden bed soil. You know, we see that in the stores a lot now. It's being marketed, garden bed soil. I mean, I haven't done a soil test, but I assume that's well into the 30 to 50% organic matter range. And they are mixing with that material some sand, some perlite, something very coarse to prevent the problem with waterlogging and air exchange. So, you know, when you buy a 3-way mix, it's going to have a lot of organic matter, definitely over 10%. And it's going to have sand and then maybe a little bit of actual soil. And so you can grow materials in very high organic matter, as long as there is porosity still. So I think, you know, there's a lot of hedging there, but the benefits of it are great because it's a huge nutrient source. And this, or the surface area, the habitat for microorganisms. But, you know, really, I think it's that as the material decomposes, what it's doing for the soil fertility and the microbial abundance is just really good for plants. So I would kind of agree with that. Like, whatever the question is, the answer is going to be add organic matter or compost.
I wanted to put a shout out for this publication that you authored, Doug. And this is one of the, this is a WSU, publication here. It's Understanding and Measuring Organic Matter in Soil. If you really want to geek out, and this is where this is really where we're missing Michael, Doug, because we just lost, I don't know if you were on at the very early, but we just lost tragically one of our master gardeners, suddenly last month. And it was, and he is he would have thrilled to have to be able to geek out with you on this work here.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I have, let me share. I've got a few slides.
Okay, hang on a second. Yeah, let me stop the share and let me give you permission to share. Please go ahead.
There we go. Let's see. Is that working? Are you seeing the full slide?
We've got it.
Okay. Yeah, so these are a few slides that kind of talk about this, a new understanding of organic matter and maybe how some things have changed. And this is an abbreviated story of what's in that publication. But one of the things that, there's this sense in historically we've talked about organic matter as we had this old stable organic matter, new organic matter that was more active. There was a lot of focus on sort of stable and active organic matter. And inherent in that was kind of an understanding or an assumption that there was something chemically very stable about the organic matter. And you probably have heard the word humus, and that there was this component called humus, which was just stable in the soil. And, it did one thing, and this other newer or not humus organic matter did another thing, and it becomes confusing, and it turns out it's not really all that helpful because there isn't really anything chemically about the organic matter that confers stability to it. It's like all the organic matter in the soil, maybe with the exception of biochar, all of the organic matter in the soil is can be a food source. It's just a matter of the environment. So that's where the location of the organic matter becomes really important, and the location does actually have an effect on what microbes can get at and what they can't get at, because it's really the microbes that we're talking about here. So if they can get at organic matter, if you're feeding the microbes, then they are going to be making available, it's a lot of energy flow just through the system, but also there's nutrients that are in that organic material, and those will only be available if the microbes can get at it. So we look at the location, and some areas to think about are this inside of aggregates, on the surface of clay particles, and then there is going to be some organic matter that's kind of dissolved in water, and then there's this material called particulate organic matter that's just kind of floating around. So hopefully you're familiar with aggregates. I think I've got a picture here. Screen. Oh, there we go. Sorry. So yeah, that's like a well aggregated soil, right? An aggregate is a conglomerate of soil that holds together. It's got stability. It doesn't fall apart when it rains. And aggregates are very important for allowing that porosity to occur. And so organic matter is key to forming those aggregates. As it decomposes and then mixes with mineral material, you get a nice well aggregated soil. It's difficult to study. This is some researchers, kind of looking at it, isolating those aggregates, and then you can look at the carbon inside of the aggregates. And that is, the carbon that's inside of these aggregates is basically locked away and can't be accessed by microorganisms until the aggregate breaks up. So you can change that environment, and all of a sudden what we would have considered to be a stable portion of the organic matter now becomes available. So for example, through tillage is going to result in this big burst of organic matter decomposition because there's this good material inside the aggregate. We break the aggregate, it's now available. So there was nothing inherently stable about that material other than that it was just, aggregated. Another form of organic matter is what we call mineral associated. So this is organic matter that is on the surface of clay particles. And there's a bit of a hierarchy of, because what you can get these little micro aggregates, which are basically a couple of clay particles like stuck together. And then those micro aggregates come together to form the bigger aggregates. But what we're kind of talking about here is really on the molecular level of the clay particle organic matter almost embedded into that clay particle. One of the new concepts that comes along with this is trying to get a laser pointer. Okay, so this concept here, this is the surface of a clay particle, and what some of the new, this is all based on kind of new technology, new microscopy, abilities to look at these clay particles. When I took soil chemistry, we really thought of the surface of a clay particle as this flat, smooth surface that was interacting with other, organic matter or whatever. But really, it's not a flat, smooth surface. It's starting to degrade, and you can almost think of it as like a mini soil profile. And it's starting to degrade, and inside of there, that's where you're getting a lot of organic matter attaching, inside of that degrading soil clay particle. So this material on the clay surface does have some inherent stability just because the microbes cannot really pull. So these would be a bunch of different kinds of organic, at the molecular level. And this adhesion to the clay surface is very strong, and a microbe cannot come along and just sort of pop that off. So the more clay you have in your soil, the more you can actually get kind of a stable organic matter on that soil surface. And then the other thing this shows is, and we'll talk about this again, but this polarity of organic materials and water. So there's a hydrophobic region here. So this is going to be, this region is able to react here. And then there's this hydrophobic region where we've got some hydrophobic organic material that is adhering to the clay surface. And then at the other end is this sort of polar zone. So this is more ready to interact with other materials like cations and be available. So that's another element. And we see that, skip that. So this is the dissolved organic material, and this is called a supramolecule. So a bunch of different organic materials that kind of come together with their hydrophobic areas together and their hydrophilic areas on the outside. And this is kind of a new term, but interestingly, this concept of a supramolecule is probably the closest to a newer definition of humus that's been around for about 20 years or so. So this concept of humus has really moved and been defined in many different ways, but the latest kind of definition that people are working with of humus is really this, I would say, this supramolecule, this, the organic matter has hydrophobic components, and those hydrophobic components will come together and be surrounded by water, and they are basically creating this stable, large molecule made of organic materials that is stable so long as you've got water around it, and that hydrophobic area maintains its core. So what happens though when you get a lot of drying and wetting is as soon as the soil dries out, this hydrophobic thing is just going to fall apart, and then when it re-wets, it doesn't come back together in the same way. So when you have areas with a lot of drying and wetting cycles, you see far less of this kind of supramolecule, or, you know, I hate to say humus, but you see far less of this sort of stable dissolved organic matter. And then the last area is the particulate organic matter. Kind of think of that as the debris field. This is just the probably newer material that hasn't really made it into an aggregate, hasn't made it onto a soil clay surface. This would be, you know, a lot of the compost that might be added might be in this area, but maybe more like cover crops, things that are turned in. They're larger organic matter. They can be, you know, very yummy to microorganisms. They can be not very palatable. There's nothing that, you know, it's really more just the fact of their size, and that they're not excluded from the buffet for organisms. So particulate organic matter, dissolved organic matter, mineral associated organic matter, and aggregate or protected organic matter. And there's a ton of interest in understanding how these different physical fractionations affect, you know, things like soil fertility, carbon storage, you know, all the other water dynamics, things like that. Any questions about the?
So you've given us a new Scrabble word here with supramolecule, right? You know, and that's fascinating into itself. Does it break down? Your point about this, your point about the water content is intriguing here. I mean, so that is from a home gardening standpoint, right? Is there some, you know, we're told, of course, to saturate the soil, right? You know, and not overwater. But is there a risk here of soil drying out? And, you know, because we actually start, you know, if plants become stressed because there's not enough water, does it end up breaking down the soil quality in the context you've just described?
Well, yeah, I think you would, you know, these supramolecules, So one of the other garden things is, you can go to the store and buy a jug of humic acids. And that would be probably similar to these materials. The humic and fulvic acids you can buy and apply. And so these do have, and if you look at pot studies, greenhouse studies where they've trialed humic acids, they do really help with soil fertility. And the reason is this is acting as a little shuttle for all of these nutrients. You see how all these cations attaching to the outside of that. And so these little, supramolecules or humic acids maybe are very good at holding on to and exchanging nutrients, which is great for plants. And, maybe even moving some of those closer to the plant root, that kind of thing. So that's some of the benefits of this kind of material. Now, when people have taken humic acids and tried to apply them into soils on larger scales, the results are much less good. And that may have to do with what you were just talking about, right? Like the reality of the wet, dry cycles that happen in soils may actually be part of the reason why we don't see, such clear results on the landscape scale or garden scale with these materials. In a greenhouse setting where there's nice control over water and they don't completely dry out, maybe they continue to do their thing. There's not interaction with clay particles, things like that. So that's one thing to think about. I think in terms of water, yeah, there's a couple different theories I've heard. One is that you water deeply and infrequently. And what that does is encourages roots to grow more deeply, maybe have a more robust root system. But talking to, for example, Troy Peters, he's an irrigation specialist at Washington State. What they do more when they manage, they do this, deficit management. So you think of how much water can a soil hold, and then you think of that as like a bathtub. And you certainly never want to overfill the bathtub, because then you're going to have leaching or runoff. So you want to let that bathtub sort of go down and then fill it up a little bit, down, fill it up. So they do much more, I would say, like frequent watering, allowing that bathtub to kind of get low and then fill it up a little bit, low and fill it up.
Now, doubling down on this thing, so the aggregate, that we started on talking about this thing, of course, and this is the time of year, of course, we see gardeners out there with their rototillers, right? And they're chewing up their lawns and so forth. And so their attempt, right, is they're trying to create some sort of fine, very fine soil content. So we recognize that the public writ large has poor understanding of soil structure and the importance of soil structure in all of this. Is there any new findings or new perspectives from WSU regarding rototilling, its benefits and its harm to garden soils?
Well, this is something I've been working on for many years, looking at reduced tillage, organic agriculture. And, I would say on a garden scale, this is something that's very doable to reduce tillage and basically eliminate use of rototiller. Or very vastly reduce, how often you use it. I would say, one of the areas where you might find a real difference would be if you're going to do direct seeding. It might be necessary, but there's some other tools that work really well on the garden scale. There's a concept called tarping. So you can temporarily cover the soil, and that will really help suppress weeds. And then you can take that tarp off and have very nice soil structure. You see a lot of earthworm activity under there. That can actually be used to manage cover crops. So cover crops is another area where tillage has potential benefit, right? If you've got a lot of biomass above ground and you want to kind of get that biomass incorporated into the soil, tillage is certainly going to be a faster way to do that. So reducing the tillage oftentimes requires a little bit more time, whether it's tarping or you could kind of like mow the cover crop at a certain time to kill it, and then you might let it sit for a while. So yeah, when you till, you are definitely breaking up those aggregates, and that, you know, I guess if you're really, there's still some research to be done on the long, like what's the difference between if you grow cover crops every year, or you're applying compost every year and you're tilling that material in, would you actually really be able to measure a decrease in soil quality versus somebody else who's not doing those things but not tilling, right? So like you're compensating essentially for the destruction of the tillage by adding those cover crops or adding that compost.
I want to come back to this concept of humic acid and fomic acid. I mean, are those relatively a new thing? And indeed, would you is there recommendations for how those should be applied in a home gardening situation?
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend them. I don't think that there's enough evidence to indicate that they're worth the money. I would say, you know, as I describe in that paper, this concept of humus or humic acid or fulvic acid, it's really what we call an operational definition. So they're just, you know, you take materials and react them with sodium hydroxide, and what you can extract is called humic acid. So we know that these things exist. So for example, if you did that operation on compost, you would extract a lot of that would be called humic acid. So I would lean more towards just applying compost or other organic amendments. They would have some of this quote humic acid, but they're also going to have more other nutrients and things like that in them.
Now, in honor of Michael Reed, who's recently passed, as we shared earlier, I have to bring up a question that I know he's listening in on, right? You know, from above, right? Because the question of charging biochar, needing to charge biochar, was of great interest to Michael. And so this is important for you to share to spirits well beyond Zoom. You know, your thoughts on charging biochar.
Yeah, he's right on there. That's great. I wish he was here. Yeah, so biochar is this material that, you know, you probably know can be created from almost any organic matter, just burned in a low oxygen environment. So what that creates is this incredible porous structure with lots of surface area. And that is a really hot area of research, is that, you know, this understanding that not all biochars are the same. And if you can make the biochar more reactive, for example, and they can do that by oxidizing it, even with like hydrogen peroxide, I think is one method that people have done on a research scale. Also just letting it age over time, it becomes more oxidized. And so that makes it much more active, and so it can grab things. But anyways, just the surface area will allow it to grab materials. So if you just put that biochar into your soil, sort of fresh biochar, and it's going to grab a lot of materials, it can be kind of acting as a sink for nutrients that are in the soil that would otherwise be available. And so it would hold on to them, and maybe even that could be a cause of a reduction in plant growth. So if you mix that material with compost or with fertilizer, something to kind of coat that material, which is what we call charging it, or loading it is another term I've seen. I think loading is becoming a little more standard, since charging becomes confused because there's this other concept of actually trying to change the charge on the surface of the biochar, versus like loading it, meaning mixing it with nutrients and things like that. And then it comes into the soil as a source of nutrients. And so, yeah, you see much better plant response when biochar is previously doctored, I guess, than as opposed to just a fresh biochar.
Interesting.
Are there any, I can share one other concept that I thought might be interesting here that I was just kind of playing around with this morning. Let's see, a little bit of. So we have this project. I was looking at that publication, the other publication here by Craig Cogger. And, you know, he talks about in this publication, basically comes up with this nice kind of just answer, I think, to the question of how much to add. And he says if it's a brand new garden, I can't find where it says that, but it says 1 to 3, you know, 1 to 3 inches for a new garden where maybe you had turf there before, or just something that hasn't been used. 1 to 3 inches of compost is a good place to start. And interestingly, we are doing, here we go, for new garden or landscape plantings at 1 to 3 inches and incorporate to a depth of 6 to 8 inches. So I have a project where we are applying compost at a pretty high level to farms. So there's a big glut of compost, commercially made compost, for example, in King County. And they are trying to get the farmers to use this material. And so we came up with the rate of 1 inch, which is a lot to apply on a farm scale. And then that was the equivalent of about 100 yards per acre, 100,000 pounds per acre wet, you know, so what's that, like 47 tons per acre, which is a pretty high rate. And then I put that into a square foot level so we can think about it on a garden. So that would be 2.2 pounds, wet pounds per square feet. So if you're applying, if you're out there with your shovel and putting 1 inch of compost on your garden, you know, that every square foot you're covering is about 2.2 pounds of material for that 1 inch. And then I've got some garden beds, which are 8 by 4 feet. So that's 32 square feet. So that would be 70 pounds of material, you know, over that 32 square foot area. And then we also have the soil, the compost test from this material. And these are on a dry basis here. And then these are on a wet basis. So this is just the percent, you know, that's not uncommon, like a 1.68% nitrogen inside of that material. And again, this is going to be all the nitrogen, most of which is organic nitrogen and not readily available. And then this is the available nitrogen down here, the nitrate and ammonia. So very, very small amount of that total nitrogen is actually available in that compost. And then this is just adding those two together. So in this case, most of it's ammonium. And so this shows how many pounds of those materials we're actually adding to our 32 square feet. And then I had this material. And so I just try to, and you know, you can look at the label on that material and it's going to say, this is a 533, so 5%. This is 5% nitrogen, and that's the same total nitrogen. That's the same number as this number right here, 1.68. So this is 5% versus 1.68 here. And then this is 3% phosphorus versus the 0.54, or sorry, that would actually be this number. This is 3% versus 1.23. So there's actually a lot of phosphate in that. I mean, there's more in here, but there's, you know, a sizable amount in that compost of phosphate, and then the almost 1% there and about 3% here. More calcium per pound in that compost. Or no, I'm sorry, about 5% calcium in this material, 2.5, so about half on a per pound basis. But that's a lot of phosphorus and potassium, or sorry, a lot of phosphorus and calcium. And so then I just kind of did the math over here, like trying to get to this idea of if we were adding that 1 inch of compost to our 32 square feet, how many pounds of this product would we have to add to get the same amount. So where we were adding 70 pounds of the compost, we'd have to add 13 pounds of this fertilizer to get that same amount of total nitrogen, which sounds a bit crazy, but keep in mind what we're really after is this amount here of available nitrogen. Like if we're thinking about that compost as a fertilizer. So where we had to add 70 pounds of the compost, we would only have to add 2.37 pounds of this fertilizer, which is pretty high rate even for this. So I think, you know, that's higher, that's more nitrogen than we would need for that area. So we would only, instead of 2.37 pounds, we would probably only need about half or third about to grow a really good crop in that area. So that's just, you know, so you're adding all this compost, but you're not actually getting a lot of available nitrogen. So I just hope I hope that's clear to everybody. But what you are getting is a lot of organic matter. You're getting a lot of organic nitrogen, which will over time become available nitrogen. You're getting quite a bit of phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and even potassium in that application. You know, not as much as you get through a fertilizer, but you're getting a lot of it that will contribute to healthy plant growth from sort of the fertility component.
And of course,
But-
here in Western Washington, here in Grays Harbor and Pacific County, by the way, where we get all this precipitation, right? So we are very concerned about leaching of nutrients, right? So
Yeah,
so over calcium, you know, we have a lot of calcium deficiency, for example. You know, that's
Right.
a real common thing for us here. And so all the water soluble nutrients, right, are easily gone. And then
yeah, and that's mostly going to be, I mean, that is really this material here is what we're talking about. Most of these other ones are going to, they do over years leach out of the soil when you have a lot of rain, but calcium, magnesium are positively charged. And so the problem with the sandy soil, yeah, there's just not a lot of surface area for these things to hang on to. So yeah, you're going to probably be fairly deficient in those just because you don't have a lot of what we call cation exchange capacity, which comes from clay, and it also comes from organic matter. Those supramolecules, those that mineral associated organic matter, anything that can coat, you know, that as you put in that organic matter, whatever clay there is, that organic matter is going to adhere to that clay. That's going to improve the cation exchange capacity. Those supramolecules themselves are going to add some cation exchange capacity. So that's going to help with these materials. But it's not going to, that compost application, you know, especially if it was made like this year in the spring, that's not going to help much with this part of the equation. And so that, you know, the compost does not necessarily take the place of this. A little bit of this will help provide some of that available nitrogen.
Doug, there was a question in the chat here talking about kelp in particular, and now I know we're talking, that's a specific, you know, soil amendment type and so forth, but it is interesting. There's a lot of talk about kelp as a soil amendment. Any thoughts in particular about it?
I haven't used it. I think it would be great. I think it would have a lot of magnesium. I think I've heard too, you know, just from the salt water, and potentially a good amount of nitrogen, probably like a cover crop. But no, I have a farmer friend on Whidbey Island, and I think he was going to do some research with it, and I haven't tracked whatever happened with that, but they were applying it at standard rates and trying to play around with it.
Your comment on compost generally is quite intriguing because, you know, a lot of municipalities are now selling their biosolid, you know, compost made from biosolids. And there's an interesting point I'm picking up on here is that you're thinking that the recently produced, I mean, so a recently produced compost that, you know, I just might pick up, you know, this afternoon or something, right? You know, might not be, it's not going to present the available nitrogen or as much available nitrogen until after it's sitting around for a season or two.
Yeah, I think by the time they bag it, you're not going to see much change. Like that would have already, those changes have happened. You're not going to see a rapid change in the material once it's been bagged. During composting, what we see is, so this compost is interesting. I'm surprised at how low this nitrate was in this particular sample. I've seen other samples where this is more reversed or more equal between the ammonium and nitrate. So this is interesting. I don't know if that means what exactly that means, but in general, we see this number go down and this number go up as composts age. Or you can see actually both of these numbers go down during the composting process, you know, and they're becoming part of the organic nitrogen, which we see reflected up here. So, you know, there's like, it depends what you're starting with. If you're starting with poultry manure, you would have really high amount of ammonia, and that number would certainly go down during composting.
There's a lot of popularity here of mushroom compost, right? Which does have a lot of ammonia, you know, in terms of its native, yeah.
Huh. I don't have any numbers on that right away. You know, just in general, composting any organic material is a good idea. It's going to be more stable, more predictable. You know, it doesn't have to be, materials don't have to be composted, but you just want to be kind of careful. You might want to apply them and allow some time in the soil for them to break down. You know, avoid kind of applying too much fresh material to like growing plants.
Comments and questions for Doug here. This is ask a soil scientist, this is.
Yeah, I'd love to get some questions. Looks like you all have pretty sandy soil. Kelly sent me some addresses to kind of check out some different community gardens. And it looks very, very sandy.
And there's no question, Doug, we actually do, so soil amendment is a big thing here. And one of the key things we have to deal with a lot, Doug, as master gardeners here, is a tremendous influx of folks who are coming from far more fertile areas, including the urban environments of Seattle or Portland. And so they're really struggling with what to do here because the soil and the climate is so different, right, from what they're experiencing with. So we find ourselves talking a lot about soil and soil amendments.
So I do have a question. This is Elizabeth, and I live in Montesano, which is not very sandy soil. I actually have a lot of clay in the soil, and wondering how adding, and I have my compost pile going and my worm bin going, how adding organic matter to the my clay soil is going to help or not help.
Yeah, you're certainly going to get all of those nutrients, the sort of the spreadsheet math approach I was just showing there. You're adding pounds of nutrients with compost applications, which is a great thing. And then you're adding organic matter, which is food for the microbes. And it's certainly going to help provide structure. So those aggregates don't just show up. They need glue to kind of hold them together, and that comes from the exudates from microorganisms. So adding compost will help aggregate that clay soil, and clay is a key ingredient in aggregates. So you can actually get more aggregation in clay soils than you do in sandy soils. But what it's not going to drastically, if you do have a lot of clay, what it's not going to drastically change would be the water holding capacity and the nutrient exchange capacity. And that's why we tend to see more of a quick improvement, I would say, in productivity in sandy soils when you add organic matter than you would in clay, because two of the key things that you're getting from organic materials are an increase in water holding capacity and an increase in nutrient holding capacity. And so clay already does a pretty good job of that. So we don't see that, but some of the downsides of clay, compaction, slow infiltration, those things, compost will help improve those, in addition to that fertility component.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also have a question. I'm Garnet, and I live in Elma, Washington. On a gravel bank, basically.
Right.
I have access to a lot of ash from predominantly hawthorn trees. I've been really hesitant to use it. and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on available, putting ash into either the compost or specific plants.
Yeah, I think in small doses, it certainly wouldn't hurt. It's going to have a lot of nutrients in it, things that were not volatilized. So I think it's going to have a good amount of calcium, magnesium in there. Phosphorus, nitrogen tends to be volatilized. Carbon, of course. So like that's the stuff it's everything that's not the carbon.
Right. Okay.
That's left
Okay.
over.
Good.
Yeah, so small doses.
I'll get that garbage can emptied out.
Yeah, I think the downsides are when you apply too much of it. The hydrophobicity is an issue.
Right. Would I be better off applying it into the compost itself, or directly on plants?
Either way.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know, Garnet, that OSU, and part of their gardening tips, they actually want you to limit the amount of wood ash that goes onto your lawn, right? And so that they have some very specific limits because of the phosphorus. They're concerned about over phosphorus. But the OSU is referring it specifically to a lawn application.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean,
I'm thinking more flower garden sort of.
Yeah, and again, we didn't talk about soil testing, but that would be
the place to start.
Yeah, like if you have high phosphorus levels, then you could probably get some book values of ash. You wouldn't necessarily have to go test the ash, but that would give you an indication of how much you're actually applying, and whether or not that's a good spot for it. And again, it may not be that much. And if your phosphorus levels aren't high, then it could be a form of fertilizer. But if your phosphorus levels are high, you certainly don't want to do that. And then I think with the lawn, people tend to water their lawns a lot, and you can have that runoff. That's how phosphorus gets into water bodies generally, is kind of running off.
Okay, well, that's helpful.
Bad.
Thank you.
Other questions for Doug? And again, I've got up on the screen here his email and his direct phone line, a direct phone line to a soil scientist. I mean, who could ask for more on this? Yeah. And by the way, he's got your publications are great, Doug. I mean, they're geek worthy on this.
Thank you.
I have a comment. This is Sue Sheila out in Ocean Shores, and we live right on the coast, and the demo garden beds and the community garden is right block away from the Pacific Ocean.
Yeah, I think
we
I looked
do
at that
get
one.
we do get lots and lots of rain through the winter, early spring months. So depletion of soil is like, real.
Yeah.
We do have well water, so we have a lot of minerals in that well water. So we have a combination of rain and the mineral, oversaturation of minerals. So we have raised beds, so we add a lot of soil and compost every year. We used to double dig our you were talking about rototilling earlier, but we found over time, the master gardeners as well, that double digging was not a good thing for soil diversity, or it would break it all up. So now we just add it to the top. But we were wondering, we cover our beds during the winter instead of cover crops, because cover crops just don't grow well out here. We have to start real early before winter so they can grow, and people are still gardening and winter gardening. So we just cover it with straw, to protect some of the soil, and then we remove it all and then add the more soil and compost for the new season. So do you have any recommendations other than straw that would be better, or other than cover crops?
I would not give up on cover crops. So I have in my garden, I came up with a rotation that's kind of a 4-year rotation, and I just have like these 4 beds. And yes, we are in a great winter gardening area. So at least 2 of my beds are occupied by, like kale going into the winter. But the other 2 beds are planted to cover crops. So I find, I work out the rotation where maybe it's following tomatoes or something, that there is time to get that area planted to a cover crop. And I think there are lots of cover crops, especially if you're in a raised bed. I don't see any reason why most of those cover crops would not grow. So I would look at things like, vetch and rye, oats, clover. It is just too much of a good opportunity to let go. So keeping the soil covered, those, the exudates from the plant roots are feeding those microorganisms. The other thing I would look at are summer cover crops. And so we use Sudan grass, and that's, I end up doing that in my rotation. And then, so the summer cover crop can be planted. One thing that I'm pretty excited about is having this summer cover crop of Sudan grass, and then I mow that down, in like September, October, and then I plant right into that without tillage, some like kale or overwintering vegetables. And then the Sudan grass, that mulch from the Sudan grass that you grew in place, will cover the soil, and you can just put transplants right into that, of something that's more winter hardy. And then whatever Sudan grass, and you just mow the Sudan grass, it might start growing again if you're still kind of early in September, but it's going to die at a winter kill. And all that mulch will basically disappear. But again, you've had that opportunity to have those plants in the soil during the summer months, taking carbon from the atmosphere, putting it into your soil. So yeah, I would think about cover crop opportunities. Buckwheat is like a 45-day, summer cover crop. Great opportunity to grow something, get organic matter, take a break, give your soil a bit of a break, and then turn that organic matter in.
So let me ask you just one other question. And a lot of gardeners I've noticed, they'll pull out their peas, bush beans, things like that, and compost it in the compost bins, but they won't cut it up and put it back into the soil. So what do you recommend? Maybe not all of the material that's dead that gardeners pull out, but some of it should be cut up and put back into the soil, their beds?
Yeah, I think that's just a matter of preference. I mean, in the reduced tillage organic work I've done, all the problems we have are because of what I would call residue.
Okay.
And, we're trying to do this, we're trying to highly mechanize the reduced tillage. So we're not going to go out there and like rake residue off of although I'm probably going to start some research that's on a little bit more smaller scale for that, where that might be a possibility. And some of the, half to 5 acre farms that I'm aware of that successfully implement reduced tillage, they're doing a lot of that kind of thing. They're pulling plants out, raking plants off, getting rid of that residue so they can, seed carrots or whatever. And in our case, the residue gets caught up in machinery that we're trying to run across there. So I can sympathize with that desire to get rid of that residue. So, the way I manage residue is with a mower, and I do this on my garden too. So I just have actually it's an electric, what we would call a rotary mower, but you just call it a lawnmower. But on a farm, a rotary mower goes like this, and the other one I have on my farm is a flail mower, and it goes like this, and it chops material up really finely. So I like to flail mow things, chop them up really finely. But in my garden, I'll just use a lawnmower. and just make sure it's on kind of the mulching mode, and you just kind of hang out over it for a minute, and it'll chop material up pretty well. And so if you can get it chopped up well, there's less of a need to kind of remove it or worry about it. It will decompose more quickly.
Okay, thank you.
But that can be challenging, you know, if you've got a raised bed or something. So there's certainly nothing wrong with raking material off and composting it. You know, that material will get back into the soil. You know, when we study cover crops, we tend to really study the above ground part, because it's really difficult to study the roots and below ground. But just having that crop in there, again, like I said, there's organic material that is coming out of the roots. The roots themselves are a huge reservoir of organic material. So those materials are having an effect just by growing there below ground. And so even if you do remove the above ground material, you still got some benefit. And it makes great compost. One of the trials I want to do, and again, to mechanize this is somewhat of a challenge, but I'd like to grow cover crops, very big cover crops, and then do what we call flail chop. So come in, basically exactly what you're talking about, like come in, mow that material, but take the material off, be able to go compost it. But if we could remove that residue, it would make a lot of the reduced tillage things we're trying to do much easier. And then the other thing I would throw out there is tarping. So in terms of covering the beds, we just did a symposium, and I don't think any of the links there would take you right to it. But if you go to soils1.org, that's our Puyallup nutrient management, organic farming and nutrient management website, and then you can go to events, and we did a symposium on this process called occulation or tarping, and also on organic no-till. And there's two different symposia there, and it's free. You just have to register. They're each about 2 hours long, but really eye-opening discussion, I would say, around especially around the occulation, which is tarping. Yeah, so go to the events and new section over on the, and then, yeah, and that's it. The organic reduced tillage in the Maritime Pacific Northwest. You can click through various places and get to the place to register for that.
Very cool.
Yeah, it was great. I was new to the occulation concept, and you know, the biggest downside of tarping or occulation is that it's not very scalable. But I mean, we're here, you know, you guys are master gardeners, and I'm a big gardener, and it's perfect. So I played around with it this year, and I was highly impressed with it. I tarped my ground for about 3 weeks. I terminated the cover crop with tarping, so I was able to mow it earlier than normally I would the cover crop, because when you're going to do a no-till termination with cover crops, we have to wait till it's in full flower to mow it, and then it'll die if it's been in full flower. So I mowed it a bit earlier than I would have, tarped it for 2.5, 3 weeks, and planted right into it.
How do you deal with rodents in tarping? Because
that came up quite a bit. That's one of the downsides. They do like to get under there, and I don't think there's a good answer. I don't remember. I think it depends. You know, in Washington we're limited. I think that one of our main speaker was from New Hampshire, but we had a couple farmers from the Northwest talk about how they use tarping.
Doug, I want to thank you so much for this time here. This is really invaluable, you know, and I want to encourage everybody on the call here to reach out to Doug, right? If you have some particular questions. As we've been discussing here, this is so important, right, for the kind of work that we do with our public. And as we've been discussing here, the importance of soil health and soil vitality is crucial for us to be able to get anything going. And one of the things I'm most concerned about is all these new gardeners who've taken up gardening as a consequence of the pandemic, right? We want them to be successful, and we want them to be have a satisfying experience. And as we all have just been talking about, right, the difference in our soils and our climates can make that gardening experience just a disaster if we're not paying
Yeah.
attention to all these things. So this is great stuff. And Doug, I thank you for your being approachable and available for this kind of dialogue. I commend you, by the
Absolutely.
way, in terms of the accessibility of your documents and your writing. So that's no small feat, right? To be able to translate in layman's terms, right? You know, these geeky concepts.
Yeah, well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Any other comments? And because we'll pick it up from there. I want to make sure that everyone who knows that this is a full hour of continuing education. So thank you, Doug, for providing that. It's kind of been a challenge this year, right? Making sure we're getting our continuing ed hours in.
A question. This is Kathleen.
Sure.
When I lived in another state, I heard that municipal compost or whatever might be tend to have some contaminants. So have you heard anything about that? Or
You know, they're tested frequently and they're highly regulated. But yeah, there are contaminants everywhere. You cannot get away from contaminants in our in our world, sadly. So when you look for things, you will find them. So I guess the question is about the standards and the regulations. One of the contaminants that concerns a lot of farmers with this municipal compost is plastic. And, this is us as humans. When we put things in our yard waste and those things like that aren't supposed to be there, they end up, in the compost. But so this just creates a big hassle for composters, and they have what are called picking lines. So they will have people that sit there on the conveyor belt of stuff that's coming through, picking out the plastic sacks, picking out the Barbie dolls, the toys, trying to prevent that stuff from going into the grinder. And they have improved their, and they can automate some of that. They can have big vacuums that will hopefully suck up like the plastic bags and things like that. But that's one of the contaminants that frustrates farmers the most, I would say, is little or not even micro, but macro plastics that, made it into the front end of the compost process and then they come out the back end. So that's a very visual contaminant. The other things like heavy metals, those aren't really a big issue for compost facilities. Or even for biosolids. I would say for biosolids, one of the issues are what we call contaminants of emerging concern. And those are things that we haven't historically looked at very much. So historically, there's been a lot of interest in heavy metals. Now, there's more looking at pharmaceuticals, persistent chemicals. Again, the pharmaceuticals are in our bodies and then they end up in the biosolids. And so we're trying to understand better kind of the fate and persistence of those materials. Do they make it through the biosolids treatment process? Do they get into soil? If they get into soil, how long do they stay around? And so there's less avenue for those to reach compost than they do, well, unless there's manure involved, right? So if you're talking about like dairy manure, you're going to have lots of pharmaceuticals, lots of antibiotics in that material. So I certainly would not diminish the problem, but I would also say, like, it's hard to find, a soil, for example, if you do look at like arsenic and lead, they can establish like a background level, for the state, but the background level is not zero. Like that background level is something. And then you've got to go to like a cave somewhere to find that background level just because of deposition from the environment. So then you have to realize like zero is not really a reality. And so what is considered high, low, or safe,
Yeah, I got to admit, Doug, is that even though the compost that we get from our municipal source, it's measured, it's tested, the levels of arsenic and lead, right, are clearly under state mandates. But I got to admit, for my own personal choice, I'm applying that compost only on my landscape beds, right, and not in the garden. So it,
Interesting.
yeah. Again, I want to thank you, Doug, very much. This is hugely insightful, and again, thank you for being making available.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everybody.
Okay, so what we got going on is that I want to thank everyone for joining us here today in this meeting here. We're going to shift over now to our board meeting and continue on with the board meeting. You're all welcome to join and stay on because this is your board and you are part of this this organization and making things happen here. So I want to welcome everybody to this and hope you can stay on. Okay. So as we kick this off, here's our agenda here for today. We need to approve the April minutes from last month. We'll do a little bit more talking about the Give Pulse site. Alina wanted me to talk more about that. I have a proposal relative to a graphics designer to create a logo for the foundation. Looking for any updates that Terry wants to provide more, not just on the plant sale just had, but on the garden tour coming up. And then, of course, to kick off discussion about announcements. So this is our agenda. Do I have any amendments or any additions to the agenda we want to make sure we're covering today? Any motion to approve then the agenda?